what can you take with you in the diaspora? You can take food, you can take music, you can take crafts, but you can't take that, like, every April the young almonds are budding on the trees and you can just pull over on the side of the road in the West Bank and like pick some almonds and throw them in a plastic bag and snack on them in your car while you drive around. Like, that is like part of being there. You can't do that in New York.
I'm Tina Rivers-Ryan, editor-in-chief at Artforum, and I am here today with the artist Jordan Nassar, who contributed an amazing portfolio to our summer 2024 issue. We are here in Jordan's studio in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for having us, Jordan, to talk about his practice and especially the recent body of work that's featured in the portfolio and that is currently on view in your solo show at Anat Egby called Surge out in Los Angeles.
It started with Palestinian embroidery. When I was in my 20s and I kind of felt like making art. I'd never been a painter or anything like that and never felt like I was good at that. As a kid, I was more into like craft. And Palestinian embroidery is just so, it was just like the first thing I thought of because I was raised in a Palestinian household where you have tons of like pillows and stuff like that around, and so that was like a very obvious thing that was like Palestinian, my heritage, and so I just like picked up a needle and thread and started doing that.
The materials in the process are actually really culturally specific and culturally coded, right? So can we, and not just like, you know, coded, but actually you collaborate with women in Palestine who are traditional craftspeople and who execute some of the embroidery. You also execute your own embroidery, and then you combine these different panels, some of which, you know, basically originate from Palestine.
So they do it their way, I do it my way, and it's kind of about that. It's about, I'm a member of the diaspora coming from here and doing it as this way to connect with Palestine. They're doing it as like a living cultural practice that they've had, that they continue to have and continue to practice. And also it's really important to me to like, you know, being in like the Western commercial art world, to have that, cause like, sure, like sometimes we do like fundraising stuff for Palestine or whatever, and that's great, but like to have these women be part of the production chain of my work, where like if I book a show next year, I need to make all these pieces to get them working on right away. I need to design stuff to get them working on it so that it can get back here in time for me to like do my part and like get the show together. And that's great. It's like so great. Like the more success I have, the more business they have.
And you know, so much of your work is actually about the way that Palestine as a physical place occupies the imagination of people who are part of the diaspora. So I wonder, now that you've been on this break where, you know, you've been away from it for so long relative to you know, your recent history, do you think your work is changing? Like, do you feel that in your more recent work?
The work is changing. I always notice, like, the longer I'm away, the more like polarized I get politically, because you only are seeing news and like like horrible videos on Instagram or like headlines or like whatever, and so you just, everything is not simplified, but like you just get less information than walking down the street. I mean, so this whole notion of like my work being kind of depicting a Palestine that's like exists in the imagination of the diaspora comes from somewhere like real, which is that I've had over the years Arabic tutors, and one of them was in Gaza, and we did a fundraiser for him and got him and his whole family out over the past few months. But another one was in Argentina, who is still in Argentina. He grew up in a refugee camp in Lebanon and then like made it to Argentina and like lives in Argentina with his family now. And I kind of, this idea started with him actually, to be fair, because he'd never been to Palestine in his life, because he is a refugee, and so it's like they would never let him in. So the way that he would always talk about Palestine was, I just noticed over time, like it was just such a fantasy. It was like utopia, the most beautiful hills, the most beautiful trees, the most delicious food, like like everything was like this perfect fantasy in his mind of like what it must be like to be in Palestine. And mind you, the landscapes that I was depicting were imaginary. Like I was just making up shapes that became the hills and like whatever. And that's really because the pieces, I call them paintings, are really about formal concerns, right? It's about composition and color work. And that went really beautifully with this idea of like, for people who can never go there, who are so attached to it, it could look like anything. Like it could be purple skies and like, I don't know, pink mountains. Like it could be whatever. And so I thought this was just like a really beautiful idea. And something based in like how it actually is to like be Palestinian and like yearn to like go there.
So I wanted to talk specifically about the composition of these mountains, because that's a recurring motif in your work. We always see these mountain ranges or these mountains. And in your most recent series, you have a particular work called Surge that actually is just one peak. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that work in particular and why just the one peak. And then actually this is the work that gives the title to the show. And if you could talk a little bit about why you decided to title it Surge.
I started making the works for the show last year, like about a year ago. But about 6 months ago now, the bombardment of Gaza started. I'm thinking about like the sentiment around talking about Palestine. I'm thinking about the general public consensus and like this surge of like understanding what really is happening there. It feels this like volcanic, in my head, when I see it, I feel this volcanic like surging. For another artist, it might be like, you see it as like part of a circle and like negative space. And it's just like this kind of equal negative positive space composition. But in the context of my work now, we see it as a mountaintop.
So let me ask you about your recent shift away from working primarily with embroidery. I mean, I think something you've been really clear about is that you're not just the embroidery guy,
right.
That it's about the sort of full spectrum of traditional crafts, and that also includes working with wood inlay, and now you're also working with tile mosaic. So could you say a little bit more about that transition? Because in your portfolio in the summer issue of the magazine, you talk about your excitement to sort of move away from working with this material that is soft and vulnerable to working with these tiles that are hard and hardy.
It's more just like there's times and places where you can't work with embroidery. So like if I'm hopefully gonna like do some public commissions or even like something outdoor that just like, maybe I want to do something for a friend's house or like whatever, like doing something that's outdoor, like these embroideries are like not outdoor hardy, right? It's like fabric. So the notion of like translating into a medium that is like, a tile floor or a tile wall or something like that is just like a cool idea, but also it translates so well because the embroidery is a grid and tiles are a grid, so it's like actually very easy to translate it and looks great.
So in this show in Los Angeles, they're actually installed on the
floor. So they're
floor.
laying on the, we built a platform for them, so not like on the floor. And so this piece is called Al-Atlal, the Ruins, and it takes the words of a song by Kulthum, and it's a love song, but it uses the metaphor of like an imaginary place or city that's like crumbled in ruins and like drinking on the memory of the ruins together. Like it's just like, I mean, the words are very literal, but like actually it's, in Arabic especially, because Arabic is so like poetic and flowery, it's just like a beautiful, sad love song. And that's when, for the piece Al-Atlal, the Ruins, this idea started to form about this mosaic that they had discovered in Gaza just 2 years ago, in 2022, that was from like the Byzantine era, from like 500 CE or something. That just got me thinking, like, first of all, it's a beautiful mosaic. So I was like, this is a really cool composition. So I was like thinking about that. But then of course, as like Gaza has been decimated the past like 8 months, it dawned on me like, this might not even be there anymore. Like this crazy antiquity, like Byzantine mosaic is probably bombed out.
There's this question that is perennial, which is how do we preserve cultural heritage when the archives, institutions, et cetera, that house that heritage right, are, have been compromised, especially through acts of war, but also through neglect, right? Like and what is the role essentially of those of us in the present? What are our responsibilities to the past and to the future? And there's something I think really beautiful that's performed in this work, because it's about the fact that sometimes these memories don't persist intact. They persist through these acts of reinscription and translation, right?
I don't think that's what culture is in a way, is like someone will make something now and you're like, I love that. And someone else will be like, well, do you know what that's referencing? And the person's like, no, what are you talking about? And then so they learn about this thing that had come before. And then like that was probably referencing something else that came before. You know what I mean? Like, so it's, culture is also like, in a way, it's kind of a path of like breadcrumbs that you can keep following. That's like the fun thing about it, is like the more you get into something, the more it opens up and you learn more about it and learn more about it and learn more, you know? Like for me to arrive at that piece, at Al-Atlal, I need to have, the archaeology happen and like understanding of Byzantine, okay, and like all that stuff. I need to have Et al-Adnan happen. I need to have Kulthum happen. I need to have artists like Jeffrey Gibson and kind of poppy, like Jeffrey Gibson was a big inspiration for these tile mosaics because it's like song lyrics, writing, stuff like that, embedded into like a traditionally made craft item and like that kind of stuff. And then he's indigenous and like very much inspiration. So like all of these strings lead into like what I'm making. That's why though, as a Palestinian American artist, I'm very purposefully using either words from poems by Et al-Adnan, by Mahmoud Darwish, by Khalil Gibran, or like singers like Kulthum. I'm using their words to title my pieces and my exhibitions very, very purposefully, because that is about the cultural heritage that I'm drawing from, and like having the freedom to do with it what you do as an individual, but yet it's all founded in like where it all comes from, and like all the like tendrils back into the past.